Welcome to the Certitude of the Catholic Faith. I'm John Veneri, and we're continuing our programs on the existence of God. The previous two programs that we did, we talked about the pretensions of so-called scientific atheists or scientific materialism. I'm not going to review all of that, but what we showed is the structure. They're actually starting with a prejudice. They're starting with a presupposition that God does not exist, and the only thing that does exist is matter. And man is just a gorgeous pile of atoms with this electric charge going through him, and everything is pre-programmed by our genes, and if I can't see it or taste it or feel it or touch it or smell it, then it's not real. Okay, they're starting with that presupposition. They're starting with materialists, and we quoted scientists who said, yes, we do this. This is exactly what we do. We refuse to let a divine foot in the door. That was a direct quote from the biologist. And they also said that we have to admit amongst ourselves that there is no, that the scientific theories don't hold for proving there is only material. But they stick to it anyway because it is the presupposition they're on. It is what has been called by others the scientific creed, the creed that they're committed to. So rather than talk more about that, because we did do two programs on it, we're going to talk today about the existence of God. And I had said in the previous program, or the previous program, that there are two ways of knowing about God, two ways of getting information about God, two ways of learning that there is a God, and that is by reason and by revelation. Since this is a Catholic program, I'm going to jump right to, we are going to be talking about God from reason. But since this is a Catholic program, I'm going to start with what Vatican Council I, the infallible dogmatic council, Vatican Council I, what it said about God. Because, yes, the Catholic Church, the Church of God, does formally teach about God. And they do so dogmatically under the threat of anathemas, but I'm not going to read the anathemas today. I just want to read the two statements from Vatican I. And these two statements will pretty much be the subject matter of the next series of classes that we do, starting with this one. Vatican I, in the dogmatic constitution of the Catholic Church, says, the Holy Catholic and Apostolic and Roman Church believes and acknowledges that there is one true and living God, Creator and Lord of heaven and earth, almighty, eternal, immeasurable, incomprehensible, infinite in will, understanding, and every perfection. Okay, I'm not going to break that down and explain it to you because this is what we're going to be talking about in the next few programs. Next point from Vatican I. Since he is one singular, completely simple, and unchanging spiritual substance, simple means he's not composed of parts the way we are. Simplicity means he is one being, not composed of parts. Since he is one singular, completely simple, and unchangeable spiritual substance, he must be declared to be in reality and in essence distinct from the world, supremely happy in himself and from himself, and inexpressibly loftier than anything besides himself which either exists or can be imagined. Okay, those are the first 2 points. Again, that is coming to us from Revelation. It is based on reason too, but I did at least want to start with the fact of Vatican I teaching in De Filius, I think, the dogmatic constitution of the Church, that the dogmatic teachings about God himself. And we're going to look more at this. I had said 2 ways of knowing about God: from reason, us looking at the world around us and coming to a conclusion that this didn't make itself, some great being must have made it, and from revelation, that is God actually communicating to mankind, telling us about himself. Our Lord God, he communicated with Abraham. We communicated with Adam, of course. Communicated with Abraham. He spoke to Moses. Noah, rather. He spoke to Moses. He came incarnate, the second person of the Blessed Trinity, to speak to us. He revealed things about himself. God, who is divine, revealed certain things about himself, and this is what we call divine revelation. Now, going back to what we said about reason, we have, and I would like to think some of the audience members, some of the viewers, have been through this at least. I wouldn't be surprised if you're not. St. Thomas Aquinas, in the beginning of his Theologia, Summa Theologia, lays out the 5 ways to prove the existence of God, and this is from reason. It doesn't rely on the Bible. You really can't use the Bible to prove the Bible that God exists, because the Bible is the Word of God. It's a circular thing, okay? But you have to accept divine revelation. But anyway, I should make that clear. But anyway, 5 ways that he gives us, all from starting with the created world, looking at things around us. Now, here is the Summa Theologia. Here's the section, the 5 ways to prove the existence of God. Here's one page. Here's a second page. Here's a third page. Here's a fourth page. 4 pages, maybe, what, 5 or 6 big paragraphs. Are you really going to prove the existence of God in 4 pages? Prove it from reason. Is he serious that he's actually going to prove the existence of God? 5 explanations given truncatedly in over 4 pages. Well, here's the point, and it is really necessary to understand this, because modern critics of St. Thomas don't understand this. They should understand it, but they don't. It shows they didn't do the research, and they started out with a prejudice against it that they did nothing to try to correct. Okay? Anyone who knows anything about St. Thomas Aquinas, any Thomistic philosopher, any Thomistic theologian, any true Catholic, traditional Catholic, I'll say, seminary professor, will tell you that the 5 ways to prove the existence of God that is contained in the Summa Theologia was never meant to be a complete, exhaustive explanation. The Summa Theologia is theology. We're dealing where we know God exists already. And the proofs of the existence of God from reason do not belong to theology. They belong to philosophy. They belong to that branch of knowledge called philosophy, where we are primarily using reason and the principles of reason, certain knowledge of all things through their ultimate causes in the light of the principles of reason. Okay, so he only, in the beginning of the Summa Theologia, he gives this because he assumes that the students who are going to read this have already had all the metaphysics. They've already been through all of the arguments exhaustively elsewhere by St. Thomas, page after page after page after page after page after page, proving the existence of God through reason, through detailed explanation, through answering all the objections. And this presupposes, as I said, you have studied the philosophy, the metaphysics, the principles of act and potency, the principles of sufficient reason, the principles of efficient causality. You've studied all these things, you know these things, and what you have to keep in mind is in the 13th century, the 12-year-olds, the 13-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, they had all of this. They were far more educated and skilled in thinking clearly than what we have today, because the modern educational system today is primarily the accumulation and the memorization of facts. What was the date of the Battle of Waterloo? What was the date of the Declaration of Independence? Who was the 43rd President of the United States? Okay, the accumulation of facts, and also in science, practical knowledge. I'm going to computer school so that I can learn how computers work, so that I can get a job in the computer world. Okay, the computer world's glutted, by the way, because everybody's going to college for that. But in any event, no education there that you were forming the intellect and you were formed in these principles of logic, of dialectic, of grammar, so that you could think clearly, argue, express yourself clearly, think clearly, dialectic, write clearly, grammar, express yourself clearly. What's the third that I'm looking for? Rhetoric. Okay, rhetoric. Okay, you had all of that. So these students who read these 4 pages, they didn't have to go through all of the explanations of it. They didn't have to go through all the thinking of it. They had it already. Basically, he's starting his book on theology saying, you remember the 5 ways, the 5 basic ways. Here's a brief summary of them. Now let's move on to other things. So anytime that you see people like Richard Dawkins, who dismisses the 5 ways because they don't really prove anything, well, the fact that he says that in print tells us more about him than he does about St. Thomas Aquinas. In fact, it can be said that Dawkins, who lives in the 20th century, knows as much about Aquinas as Aquinas knew about Dawkins. Okay? One of the things he says, for example, one of the things Dawkins says is he says that, well, the problem with St. Thomas is he tries to prove he tries to prove in the 5 ways that the world had a beginning. Well, he doesn't. Anyone who reads the 5 ways knows that Thomas, for the sake of argument, as a philosopher, says philosophy, pure reason, cannot prove that the world had a beginning. Somebody who was there at the time has to tell us it had a beginning, and that is God. Aquinas bases his arguments on the proofs of the existence of God on the supposition that the world has always been here. Okay? So many people who criticize and dismiss the 5 ways, including many Catholic so-called professors, because the method of St. Thomas Aquinas came out of vogue, it came out of style in the early 20th century, and especially after the Second Vatican Council. He was thrown away because they were lusting after new, faulty, subjective, phenomenologist, philosophical systems, and the vast majority of Catholics do not even know the most basic teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas. So there's a lot we could say about this, but I want to get to the argument itself, because it does take a little thinking. It does take a little thinking. We're going to be talking about terms, and within the structure that modern man is just not familiar with. And the problem is not the structure, the problem is not the metaphysics, the problem is modern man. Principles such as act and potency. Principles such as formal and material object. Now don't turn off your TV. Don't be afraid, because it's actually very easy to understand. But principles of act and potency, principles of sufficient reason, principles of formal material cause, the 4 causes. And if you went to Catholic school and you are hearing these terms for the first time, or you went to Catholic high school, Catholic university, and you were not explained and drilled in these terms and made to understand their importance, then you should go back to that school and demand a refund. Get all your money back, because you have been had. You've been given a fraudulent education, or you've been given a woefully inefficient education. This is a central part of Catholic education, high school education, university education, that must be brought back, because you really can't come to a full grasp of God as the first mover, the proofs for the existence of God, unless you know the necessary Aristotelian and Thomistic metaphysics that is based on. And Aristotelian metaphysics, you know what it is? You know what it really is? It's a detailed explanation of what we all know instinctively. One of the reasons that Aristotle and Aquinas philosophy is so good, so rewarding, so helpful, is because it all makes sense. It all tallies with common sense. And you just take nature and common sense and study it and understand it better. What it is. That's what that Aristotelian Thomistic philosophy, that's all it does. It is a detailed explanation of what we all know instinctively. The modern methods, when you go to school and you study epistemology, and you have professors who end up saying, well, you think that I'm standing in front of you, but you don't know that. And you're taught to question everything, whether anything else even exists. Whether you can know anything for certain. Well, that's a pretty theory. Yeah, okay, well, the professor will tell you, well, you don't know anything for certain. But believe me, he cannot live in that false system that he's built up, because when Friday comes around and it's time for him to pick up his paycheck, and if he goes into the office to get his paycheck and the superintendent says, well, a paycheck is just a figment of the imagination anyway, and you don't really know if it's real, so why should I give it to you? Well, you'll see he'll put up a stink. He suddenly becomes a Thomist then. He suddenly becomes an Aristotelian then. I want my paycheck. I want to hold it. I want to cash it and use the money. Okay? So, Aristotelian Thomistic metaphysics, Aristotelian Thomistic philosophy is just a detailed explanation of what we all know instinctively from the greatest minds the Church has produced. Aquinas, Scotus, Garrigou-Lagrange, Father Woodbury, these great minds. So we're going to go to the first mover. Now, what St. Thomas does is, as any good scientist, as any good philosopher, he doesn't start with an airy theory in the air. He starts with something real and around us. He says, it is certain and evident from our senses that some things are in motion. Okay? And we also know that the principle that flows from that whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. In English, sometimes you see it written as, whatever is moved by another. That is dead wrong. That's the wrong way to say it. Translators, please, make sure you don't translate it that way. The proper phraseology is, whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. Again, very simple. You step out your door in the middle of January and pow! You get hit with a snowball. You never say, I guess that snow just launched itself out of the ground and smacked me in the face. No, what do you scream out as the snowball is dripping down your undershirt, down the side of your face? Who threw this? Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. Now, when he's talking about movement, okay, it's very interesting. He's not only talking about movement as far as the bird flying, or the ball moving, or the ball rolling, or the man walking. He's talking about that type of movement, but he's not talking about only that type of movement. What Aristotle and St. Thomas speak of motion, when they do, it's in the more comprehensive understanding of change. Whatever goes through a change, it has to be caused by something else. Here, the example here, this candle. Now here's this candle here, and I can have this candle. If I put this candle into a clay pot and heated it, it would melt. So what does that mean? That means this candle is actually hard wax, but it has the potential to be melted wax. But it will never change itself from hard wax to melted wax without the heat actualizing it, melting it down into something different. And when it is melted down, it is actually melted down and has the potential to be made a candle again. When something is in act, it does not also possess the potency for that act because it has it. Okay? This thing does not have the potential for being a hard candle. It is a hard candle. It has the potential for being a melted candle. Everybody knows what one of these is. It's a balloon. Now, the balloon, This is a deflated balloon. It has the potential for being what? An inflated balloon, a big balloon. Now you could hang this balloon up for 1,000 years. It would never inflate itself. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. It needs someone to actualize it, to inflate it. It had the potency of being when it was deflated, it had the potency for being inflated. Now that it is inflated, you don't say it has the potency to be inflated, you say it is inflated and it has the potency to be deflated. And that has to be actualized by another. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. Same thing when we see with a pot of cold water. If you dip your finger in a pot of cold water, you come back in an hour and dip your finger in its boiling water, you never come to the conclusion that it boiled itself. Okay? So this is the central principle of, one of the central principles of God as the first mover, that whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. We also see this in what is called, we also have to understand something called essential subordination. What does that mean? It means, I'll use this candle for example. Now this is my hand, just say this is a stick, and I'm moving, just say this is a stone. The hand moves the stick, moves the stone. That's essential subordination. Okay, all these things have to work together in order to produce the effect. Same thing with a freight train. You see a freight train going by. And the one freight train is being pulled by the one in front of it, which is being pulled by the one in front of it, which is being pulled by the one in front of it, which is being pulled by the one in front of it. Okay? The mind never says that freight train is just moving itself. The mind never says that. It says some engine has to be actualizing this what's the word I'm looking for? the subordination, the essential subordination. Some engine has to be actualizing it. Okay, you have to go back to a first mover. And so everything in the world is in motion, but whatever undergoes movement is moved by another, and you just keep going back, you keep going back, you keep going back. You cannot have what's called infinite regress. You have to go back to some first mover who is not moved by any other. And the reason we say that is because if the first mover was moved by another, then he would be going from potency to act. Something else would have to be actualizing him. There would have to be something else. You have to go back to a first mover who is complete act in himself and who is not moved by anything else and who does not change. And that first mover is whom we call God. Now, I've given this very quickly, and if you're not satisfied, blame me, don't blame St. Thomas, because St. Thomas explains it all, Garrigou-Lagrange explains it all. But we can, in more detail than I could possibly do in a television program. Again, the only way to stop the infinite regress is to come back to one great mover, one first mover, who is not moved by anything else. And this, I mentioned this in the previous program, this is also an understanding of this, is how we answer the typical question. It's a rather, kind of a high school question, really, but you see big name scientists asking this question. Oh, well, if you're saying the first mover is God, then who made God? Yeah, got you there. Oh, yeah, that is a tough one, isn't it? Oh, gosh, who made God? Well, we'll call the first mover, we'll call him little God. Well, then who made the little God? Oh, gosh, the bigger God, I guess a bigger God. Oh, well, who made the bigger God? Oh, well, we'll call him super God. Well, who made super God? Oh, well, super duper God, right? You see what's happening. You see what you've done. You're still trapped in infinite regress. You're still trapped in one thing moving another, moving another, moving another, moving another. And you can't have that. You can't have a series of movers without a first mover who is unmoved by anything else. And this is the whole argument. You cannot have that any more than you could imagine a freight train that is just constantly moving. One freight car after the next, one freight car after the next, one freight car after the next, without it being pulled by anything. Or trying to imagine a chain. You see a chain dropping down in front of you. You look up. The one link is here. The next link is up. Next link is up. Next link is barely. You see it going straight up to the clouds. All the way up to the clouds. Your mind would never say, the natural metaphysics of human intelligence, your mind would never say, that's just going straight up, suspended in the air, with nobody holding it. No, just the way you know someone has to be holding up that chain. Just the way you know that the freight trains has to be pulled by an engine, ultimately, so we know that all motion, everything that moves, everything that changes, has to come from a first mover here and now, not back in time, here and now, that is not dependent on any other, that is all-powerful, and that does not change. There's a lot more to explain all this, and we will deal with it in the next program.